But we begin tonight with the rise of Team Normal, thanks to President Joe Biden, well, Bidening. After his theory of the case in politics that bipartisanship is best actually won out last night when the House of Representatives voted to pass the debt deal he worked out with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Because guess what? Normal may not be flashy, but it is a winning strategy. Not only did the House pass the bill to suspend the nation's debt ceiling for 2 years and resolve the budget in the process, it showed that normalcy can prevail over political extremism. With the bill winning a resounding 314 votes, carried over the line not by Kevin's Republicans, but rather by Democrats, 165 of them. The no votes came largely from the right and left flanks of both parties. And while progressives have every right to be annoyed that President Biden negotiated with the Looney Caucus on the nation's full faith and credit at all, in the end, Biden's strategy to win over House Democrats and, as Lawrence O'Donnell pointed out on this show yesterday, getting the budget out of the way in the process worked. And while plenty of us in the media are ready to give, well, maybe not us, because I ain't, ready to give Kevin McCarthy his flowers for what exactly? Taking our economy hostage, not falling completely on his face, and relying on Hakeem Jeffries to get the deal passed while a quarter of Kevin's caucus voted against it. McCarthy himself was full of praise for Biden's team after last night's vote. And in particular, Office of Management and Budget Director Shalonda Young and Senior Advisor Steve Ricchetti.
I will tell you, the individuals from Shalonda Young to Ricchetti, I have the utmost respect for them. They are bright. They are tough negotiators.
As for Kevin's House Republicans, the 71 MAGA Republicans who voted against the bill are still mad that they didn't get to kick the pores and that Kevin had the audacity to cut a deal with Biden at all. And even this not-so-bright crew can see that he got out-negotiated. And that is because Joe Biden actually is effective at doing this job in a low-key way that is light on bragging but heavy on delivering for the American people. In this case, saving us from a catastrophic default. But even before this, with the Inflation Reduction Act or the bipartisan infrastructure law or the most significant gun violence reduction legislation in 30 years, again, Biden ain't flashy. But he has proven time and time again that he can deliver, even when some of us in the media doubt his bipartisan strategy. And if Biden is captain of Team Normal, his 2024 opposition is shaping up to be a bunch of anything but. People who want to ban abortion, ban books, pardon January 6th insurrectionists, and somehow ban wokeness, and also magically make people not be gay or trans anymore, and not a whole lot else. Donald Trump keeps proving he's unfit for office since he fomented an insurrection, got indicted on 34 felonies, was found liable for sexual abuse and defamation. And he's now under increased scrutiny from federal prosecutors over a tape of him talking about how he kept a classified document on Iran that he knew was secret and hadn't declassified. Then there's Ron DeSantis, who can't even figure out how to pronounce his own last name and has no real positions on anything other than, to paraphrase 2008 Joe Biden, making every sentence a noun, a verb, and the word woke, when he isn't cosplaying as Biff from Back to the Future like he did in New Hampshire today.
Governor, how come you're not taking questions from voters?
Stop coming up to me, talk to me. What are you talking about? I'm not here working with people. Are you blind?
What?
Are you blind?
I'm not blind.
Okay, so people are coming up to me, talking to me, whatever they want to talk to me about.
I am mean anti-woke robot. And there's South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who couldn't articulate his own views on a 6-week abortion ban 1 week after praising the one just passed in his own state.
So would you sign a 6-week abortion ban?
Thank you for asking the question twice. But here's what I would suggest, that in order for us to be able to have a conversation about limits, let's start with a 40-week. Would you agree with a 40-week abortion?
I'm a journalist.
Well, you have an opinion, though. So here's my point.
I'm also a woman.
Here's my point. Well, I mean, so you.
So I do have an opinion, yes.
Yeah, of course. But I do too.
Why is Tim Scott? As for the other candidates, I don't even know what Nikki Haley's purpose in this campaign is, frankly, except to join Asa Hutchinson as potentially viable in the extinct 2014 version of the Republican Party. But it is about to get even more crowded. Next week, former New Jersey governor and bridge closing expert Chris Christie is expected to toss his hat in, presumably for the sole purpose of becoming a human torpedo aimed at Donald Trump. And former Vice President Mike Pence will soon begin his quest to convince the people who wanted to hang him at the Capitol during the January 6th insurrection to make him president instead. But the challenge for all of these people is that President Biden is the actual president. He's the incumbent, and he is delivering actual results. None of them have offered a thing to vote for. And as the old saying goes, you can't beat something with nothing. Joining me now is Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary and host of Inside with Jen Psaki, Sundays at noon Eastern, right here on MSNBC, and Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large of The Bulwark, who has the disadvantage of being away from us. But I'm going to start with you ladies first. Jen, you know, I do feel like Biden has this misunderestimated thing, right, where people assume, oh, you know, he's too old, he doesn't know what he's doing, and then he just keeps delivering. You know, today he tripped over I guess there was like a sandbag on, and Twitter and the right are going crazy.
It's currently dominating Fox News primetime.
It's the most important thing in the world. First of all, Donald Trump is 76. He's not exactly young. And, you know, it's the advance team or whoever's fault that they put a sandbag in front of him. I trip in my own house. I mean, it's not easy.
Same.
So what do you think it is about Joe Biden? Is he so enraging to the right because he is so normal? What do you think it is about him that drives him nuts?
Well, if you look back, Joy, to 2020, they were trying to figure out how to take him out. They can't make him extreme. Yeah. They can't really make him offensive. I mean, one, he's a white man who's older, so you know he is comfortable to many in their base. But I think also they have underestimated him at many times, as you just said, as many people have. That's not necessarily a disadvantage to Joe Biden. I mean, I worked for him for a year and a half. He's always been underestimated. He's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because of that. That can serve you well. But I think they're trying to throw a lot of spaghetti up at the wall to try to take him down. And so far, they haven't quite figured it out. That's why when you talk to Republican strategists back in 2020, they would say, we don't really want it to be Joe Biden. Because people aren't freaked out by him.
And the thing is, Charlie, there's a reason why Donald Trump was willing to try to bribe the president of Ukraine to not make it Joe Biden, right? To destroy Joe Biden, because I think he understands that he actually is, he's more like Donald Trump's base than Donald Trump, or certainly Ron DeSantis, Harvard and Yale. Here he is, Ron DeSantis today, because he's trying to sort of scale himself as I'm the working class man's hero that's going to somehow make wokeness disappear from the White House. But here he is actually being himself. Here he is.
Leadership, at the end of the day, it's not about entertainment. It's not about building a brand. It's not about virtue signaling. It's about producing results.
Sorry, that was yesterday, but every day is basically the same day with Ron DeSantis, because he just keeps saying the same thing. I mean, the reality is all he does is virtue signal. He has no policies in Florida on insurance, taxes, you know, price of rent. All he does is virtue signal, woke, gonna ban books, woke. I mean, that is virtue signaling. I don't understand what he is other than that. And that ain't working class.
Well, also, you know, I'm glad that Jen highlighted what's going on over at Fox News right now, because it is absolutely essential for them to run Joe Biden falling down on a loop, because they don't want to focus on what's been playing out over the last week. I mean, Joe Biden had a very, very good week being president of the United States, being misunderestimated, you know, having a deal that looks better all the time. Now, there were those of us like me who said he should have used his bully pulpit. I think he actually played the inside game very, very effectively. So we are not going to have a default. We are not rushing into a recession. We don't have a crisis at the border. And so it's very important to distract attention from that, but also to the point you're making about normal versus crazy. Now, I know that most people want to live their lives, especially going into the weekend, and you don't want to spend time reading tweets or bleats from Truth Social by Donald Trump. But if you actually paid attention to him on a daily basis, you are seeing someone who is decompensating, who is becoming more deranged almost by the day. If this was the kind of thing that you saw a family member or a coworker doing, you would ask for an intervention. You would make a wellness call on all of this. So the Republicans do have this problem. They would love for next year to be a referendum on Joe Biden. In fact, it might be a referendum on, do you want normal or more of the exhausting craziness that you're seeing right now? Because this is really a pretty dramatic moment. And, you know, if it is, in fact, Donald Trump, I think a lot of people are going to go, okay, we just can't do this anymore, no matter what. So the contrast this week was pretty dramatic, I thought.
You know, and I think the other piece is, and I will say this to both of you, that I think that because of the conversation that the right kind of drives, you would think that more people than actually in the real world sit around thinking about wokeness.
Yeah.
I promise you they don't.
No.
In the real life, I mean, I think that the right has...
People can't even define it.
They don't even know what it is, but they also don't think about it. Yeah. I don't think that parents in the real world are thinking, oh my God, I cannot let the bluest eye be read by my child.
No.
It'll destroy her. Like this isn't something, because parents don't even know what their kids are reading in school. And I think that they have, because even if it's not Trump, let's say it's Tim Scott. It's not going to be Tim Scott, but let's say it is. What is Tim Scott for? They're all of their ideas are about changing society, about changing the way society acts. A president can't do that. Biden is like, I'm going to get you some money. I'm going to get you some student loan relief, which Republicans right now are voting to overturn student loan relief, student debt relief. And he's going to veto it. Who are young people going to say is on their side? Him.
Exactly. Look, I often think about, I'm not in their campaigns, blissfully, but who are they listening to? And who do they think, who is telling them that anti-woke or elitism, which was another big tick calling card for Ron DeSantis this week, is what people care about? I can tell you how Joe Biden gets his information. Even in the White House, he would go home every weekend to Delaware. He'd go to church every Saturday. After church, he'd talk to people after church, and he'd come back to the White House and say to us, so-and-so doesn't understand what our rules are on COVID.
Right.
So-and-so is like really concerned and doesn't understand what the debt limit is.
Right.
He would talk to normal, real people.
Right.
He would see at church who would tell him, and sometimes they were things that were critical of his administration, how we were communicating, or whatever it is. They are running a campaign based on Twitter, based on Truth Social, based on fundraising, based on getting more likes. It is disconnected from the country, to your point, and people who are struggling to put food on the table, to get health care, to make sure their kids are getting an education and can pay for an education. And that is the root of their problem, who they're listening to.
And